Yay, thank you so much. All right. I am so thrilled to be here. One of the joys, my name is Marc Pitman. I'm a leadership coach for nonprofit leaders and other folks too. One of the joys of this conference is that attendees, we like to call you guys guests, shape so much of the content. And so when Chris, Steph, and I were starting this 5 years ago, we wanted nonprofits to be able to tell really good stories. Chris is a movie guy, and nonprofits took forever to get their stories together, and they weren't really good when they told them. And so he really wanted to figure out a way to crack that nut and help nonprofits. In the process, we have continued to listen to attendees, and one of the things you guys said last year, I think Chris's brilliance was, instead of just saying, how did you like the conference? He said, he sent out, for those of you who were there, he sent out another email saying, what keeps you awake at night? Or what are your biggest problems? And I think many conferences probably lose steam because they start tweaking the conference as opposed to serving the needs of the people coming. And what we learned in serving the need, and the question of what keeps you awake, is that many people here are struggling with leadership. It's either their own leadership internally, or the people that are above them, or the people that think they're above them, or the sideways leadership. There's a lot of wrestling on when you get back to your office. And that made my heart sing because I love helping with leaders. I'm a Franklin Covey certified coach. I've master's in organizational leadership. I've been leading nonprofits and for-profits for most of my adult life. And I just love helping leaders. Without leaders, and it's not a title, it's an attitude. Without people taking leadership wherever they are, our world doesn't get better. And the nonprofit sector, the NGO sector, is huge proof of that. Because people in our sector see a problem and they fix it. And then they realize that they need to fund that, and they realize that they maybe should have some organizational structure and other stuff. But leadership is just built into the very system of our structure. So what I'm excited to share with you today is how the stories, not only the stories we tell donors and others, but the stories going on right in here can really sabotage ourselves. How many of you have a radio station that's going on in your brain? A lot of us. Has anybody read Anne Lamott? Okay, so if you guys know the radio station, if not, read Anne Lamott. She has a little off-color term for how bad that channel can be in your brain. We're going to talk about the power of story, then we're going to show some exercises on different ways to start inventorying the stories you're telling yourself. Because oftentimes it's uncritical. It's super critical, but we're not objectively looking at these stories. You guys ready for the ride? Yeah. All right. Can you, I won't put my family on the spot. Pamela, when I get to like 10 minutes left, could you just flash like 2 hands with all the fingers, not just the 9? Okay, great. I didn't want to drop the clicker, of course. All right. So as we're going into this, many of us are going to go back to our nonprofits and feel like, I just can't get this done. I'm beating my head against all the things that we're supposed to be doing. I just spoke to somebody in the lobby who said she's been tasked with growing their annual fund, and so the only solution that people have for that is adding another newsletter to a different target group. And she's producing a deadline a month without getting anything accomplished. But that also will happen with ourselves, because some of the stories that attendees, many people coming back from a conference have are things like, there's no way I could ever do this. Yeah, I'm never going to get this done. That was just a big waste of time. I shouldn't have done that. Stories that we tell ourselves. One of the neat things about Franklin Covey, anybody read 7 Habits? Okay, it's a great book. If you don't like the way that Stephen Covey writes, his son wrote 7 Habits for Highly Effective Teens, which is a little bit more human speak as opposed to academic speak, but both are very good. He talks about, usually we think there's a stimulus, something hits us, and then we respond to it. And that's mostly how we live our lives. As leaders and as non-leaders, things hit us and we react. But what he taught us in the first habit is that there's a space between stimulus and response. Even if it's minuscule at first, there is a point where something hits us and we get to make a choice about how we're going to respond. And it's responding, not reacting. Reacting is when you don't make the choice. If we give up the ability to make a choice, then we become no better than animals, but we have this ability to make a choice. And what's neat about that, as we've been learning more about story, is that ability to choose is actually powered by story. It kind of dictates the path that we're going to take. I stumbled across this because I've been doing leadership coaching for 15 years of leaders. And the people were different. If you've ever talked to any of your colleagues, you'll all say the same thing as, I'm a nonprofit, and I know nonprofit fundraising is similar, or nonprofit marketing is similar, but we're different, right? Each of you is different in the same way. It's sort of like in high school in the 80s when people were trying to be, they were anti-establishment. They were doing it in the same exact way. They're trying to non-conform, but they dressed the same way. So I dressed like Alex P. Keaton with a briefcase, and I said, I'm the true nonconformist here, and they didn't understand me. But what I've noticed over the years of working with leaders is that there's a journey that we're on that can, and this, what I'm going to show you is some of the map for that journey. We usually either take external stimulus in our leading or internal stimulus. We take external sources, books, other people, or internal, listening to our own intuition and the things that we know to be true. And the other side of the graph, so that's the resonance graph. The other side is the confidence one. Are we confident or are we unsure? How do we feel about, how confident are we feeling in the choices we're making? So let me show you the 4 different quadrants. The first quadrant is quadrant 1. This is the observe quadrant. This is when you start as a leader. You're super excited because somebody gave you a leadership title or gave you a task to complete, and you're on it. You're high confidence, and you know it can be done because you've seen other people do it. How hard could this be? People less smart than you have done stuff like this, and so it's going to be really easy, and you have all this bluster, and you're excited. There's a saying in leadership stuff that if you're a leader and you're on a walk and you look around and there's no one behind you, you're just on for a walk. You're not leading any at all. And that's what happens. When you start going on your walk, you realize, there's no one behind me. What's going on? And so you start losing your confidence. You start moving to quadrant 2, and then you start looking externally still to other clues. You get books, you get podcasts, you get tapes, you get all these other structures to try to bolster you up. These are both good quadrants. Quadrant 1 teaches you who to follow, who are the safe people to follow. Quadrant 2 teaches you what type of learning styles you have. Are you a listener? Are you an audio person, a reader? Do you like video? Would you prefer to go to an event? Those are all good, but after a while, they start sounding similar, don't they? In the sense that a lot of the external stuff will promise you success. Your life will be different. You'll have no stress. You'll be in a state of nirvana if you only implement our system. And that doesn't always work. And so you start feeling like you're broken, and the stories you tell yourself in your head is, oh, I must be broken because it worked for everybody that endorsed the book. So if it's not working for me, there's got to be something wrong with me. And most organizations and most people get stuck in quadrant 2. They just loop around constantly looking for the next kind of fad of the month. Is it going to be fish sticks? Has anybody done the fish sticks training? Good training. We did it at a hospital. And then a few months later, we did the Raving Fans by Ken Blanchard. And who here has read Getting Things Done by David Allen? Great book. Yeah, okay, great book, great system. What David Allen says is your whole life can be in control if you dump your brain onto a to-do list, in a series of to-do lists in hanging folders. And then you put in every to-do list, you put the next action that you're going to take on it. Well, that doesn't work for me. I found that out, that doesn't work. And so for a while, I thought I was broken because everybody else that read it seemed to like it, the people I was listening to. The way to get out of this step is to move into listening to your internal cues. And start listening to, instead of this doesn't work for me, I must be broken, start saying, this doesn't work for me. I wonder what this tells me about myself. Kind of like Peter was talking about yesterday with the neutral language. Instead of blaming yourself and shaming yourself, thinking about, what does this say about me? Well, with Getting Things Done, what it said about me was, I'm just not a list person. I don't know if you guys are like this, but I love writing lists after I've done stuff. Because then I can cross it off, and it feels awesome to get it out. I learned from Getting Things Done that if I write a list, I need to put an action step after that. If I have a task, I have to put what's the next action step to do. If it's write an annual fund appeal, the next action, or direct mail program, it might be the next action step is write an annual fund appeal. That reminds my brain when I go back to it that this is the next step. So I don't have to kind of rev myself up about getting all immersed into what that task is. I just know what the next step is. That was a piece of getting things done that I was able to take and discard the rest. And what I've noticed is that leaders that are in quadrant 3 are the ones that are starting to learn to analyze. And this, I'll be really frank with you, this is the scariest quadrant to live in. Because in quadrant 1 and in quadrant 2, we're living where we've spent most of our life. Our parents tell us what to do, and whether we like it or not, we can choose, but we're told what to do. In school, our teachers tell us what to do, and the principals and the coaches tell us what to do, and we do it or not, but we're being told externally. In work, we have a boss that tells us what to do. And growing, as you grow up in management, you still have people that are telling you what to do. Especially for an executive director of a nonprofit, it's really scary to be in quadrant 3 because for-profit businesses have a boss. If you're a for-profit, you run your company, you service your customers, and they pay for you to run your company. And it's a revenue cycle that's very easy to understand. A little bit murkier in nonprofits, isn't it? You're an executive director, and you've got your board is your boss. You don't own the enterprise. It's a community enterprise. You've given up control, even if you're the founder. It's not you. It's your board that's your boss. And oftentimes, they think that each one of them individually are your boss. They're not. It's the group as the board when they're meeting as the board that's your boss. And then you've got your staff that's thinking you know what to do, and you've got your mission, the clients that you have that you're serving, but they're not funding it because there's donors that you have to learn how to communicate with. So it's almost like you're getting drawn and quartered as a leader of a nonprofit. And the analyze step is really hard in quadrant 3 because you're starting to press into believing what you know to be true, what you've heard from other colleagues, and also what fits with you. Then when you start getting some level of confidence, and usually it's baby stepping, kind of like What About Bob? Baby stepping on a bus, baby stepping with my goldfish. Taking really baby steps, but learning to build confidence with, ooh, the world didn't fall apart when I said, I don't like all of that's going on. Oh, that didn't work for us last time, so even though the board wants another bake sale, I'm gonna say no this time too. And they then roll with it, and you start building up your muscles to be able to trust that internal compass that you have in addition to all the good external stuff that you've learned. And that's when you move into quadrant 4, a focus leader, where you're able to tell yourself the story of, I have seen what the external stuff is saying, and there's truth in that. I'm not invalidating that truth, but for our organization and for me as a leader or for me as a staff member, that doesn't work for me. And I'm not copping out on this, but this is how I'm going to internalize it and make it work with me. So let's go into quadrant 3 leadership. Well, first of all, I guess part of the workshop, what quadrant do you think you're in right now? Or if it's easier to answer, what quadrant do you think your organization is in? Talk at the tables, and then, some people are already ready to popcorn. Talk at your tables, because I'm going to silence my watch so I don't get any more text messages. And then we'll have a popcorn answer. Awesome. Okay, great. Good job working together. So what quadrants are you each in? We have a quadrant 3 over here for both the organization and the people. 3. Quadrant 5? Oh, my wife is saying she's above it all because she's quadrant 5. And I'm saying absolutely. You're absolutely right. That's great. Who else? How many people think they may be in quadrant 1? It's a good quadrant to be in. Okay, yep, definitely. How many people think they may be in quadrant 2? And a lot of us here, part of the reason we come to conferences is quadrant 2. That's totally good. How many people said quadrant 3 totally hit the sweet spot? Deb? All right, yeah, so that's great. And how many people think they're in quadrant 4 because they've gone through this enough? Yeah, okay, there are quadrant 4 people here too. What is beautiful about having this map, I have found, and it's only in the last year that I've been able to articulate it this way, is that it seems to work for nonprofit leaders. It seems to work for homeschoolers and people that are doing other community service stuff. It seems to work for teachers and bosses and all sorts of people. And it becomes a journey that you continue to go on. When you've moved from quadrant 1, 2, 3, and then into focus, then you can start looking at the people that report to you. You can look at your board and think about what quadrant are they in, and what are the tools that we need to take to move them to the next quadrant. How can I help them in their journey? And it doesn't become being as frustrated with them. There's still frustration. We're all people. But it also helps, maybe we can think about what steps can we take to help move them along in their growth process. And celebrate where they are as well. All right, let's look at quadrant 3. The analyze quadrant, this is where the sweet spot of, I found the largest leverage or the largest gains for coaching and other things happen in quadrant 3. The first part is your hardwiring. Tomorrow we'll look at the Enneagram and how you can use the Enneagram. How many people here know the Enneagram system? Yeah, okay, I'm going to be doing a teaching on that first thing tomorrow. There's the Highlands Ability Battery you could do. There's DISC. Anybody did DISC? Last year I had all five, there were like 500 people last year, and I had everybody up doing DISC in the 4 quadrants. It was really fun. This is where you just figure out, how do I do things? Not everybody's wired the same way, and that's okay. But most of us don't realize that. Most of us think that the wiring that I've seen my boss do is the same way I have to be. For me, as a total extrovert, I thought all fundraisers needed to be extroverts throwing parties and being energized by them. I found out in one position, my boss and her boss were both introverts. And so after doing this incredibly brilliant annual fund event at a brew pub in Boston, I knew it was brilliant because it was my idea. I was ecstatic because I was just like, let's do the next one. And I looked over to find my boss and the headmaster, and they were flat on the floor. They were so exhausted, they needed 3 or 4 days in an apartment by themselves, in 2 different apartments, one each, to re-energize. And so if you know that about yourself, you'll know that, maybe going to every session at a conference isn't my thing. Maybe I need to go to a session and check out by the pool or check out in the room. There's different things that you can do to accommodate for that with your hardwiring. The next is your identity. This is the part we're going to focus on today, your stories. How so much of our being, as you know, because you're here at this conference, is operated by story. So we're going to spend the rest of the time on that. But the other part is your goals. Sometimes you may have very similar stories and very similar hardwiring as somebody beside you, but vastly different goals. And so knowing and being clear on those goals can be helpful. I hope you can see that this in part is organizational development too. Our organizations are hardwired in a particular way. And they have stories that they tell themselves, or we tell about each other to build up the culture, and there are goals. And we can go through a large part of our life not even being aware of what our goals are, even though we think we are, but we aren't. Some people's goals, in the context of the last session, some people's goals are not to prioritize the revenue streams and see which one's better. Some people's goals are to be seen as doing something innovative, depending on where in the world you're from. Here's another goal. How many of you use TV advertising? Not many. Okay. If you use TV advertising, which NGOs in other parts of the world do, there's the ad spend that you should be spending to get the target people you want, and then the 20% that you need to be spending to let the CFO know that you've spent the money well. So all the shows that the typical people that you want to reach are watching different shows, but your CFO is watching certain shows, and your goal has to be to also make him or her feel good about the ad spend. So there's goals that we don't talk about. You never put that on a strategic plan and show them, hey, we've got the make you feel good about yourself CFO job goal here, but we need to be really explicit about that. When we have that, when we have an intersection of our hardwiring and our identity, we learn our personal style. When we have the intersection of hardwiring and goals, we kind of figure out some of the mission. And this is a huge place for those of us in work, because sometimes our organizations don't really line up with our personal missions. And then we're in that space between stimulus and response of, what do we choose? Do we choose to find a fulfillment for our mission somewhere else in other aspects of our life? Or do we start changing our job to find something that fits our mission better? Both choices are valid. Both choices are fine. It's not a good or bad thing. But it can be really helpful to feel that, that's why I'm under stress. These are out of alignment. And so how do I get back into alignment? And then with the goals and the identity, that's kind of how we flesh our values, which is another part. When our mission is not in sync, our values also may be. We might be doing the same thing. We may be wanting to rescue animals in parts of Georgia. Hey, Julie. We may not be doing the goals in the same way as our organization would want that. Our values may be different. We may value our staff more than our organization values our staff. And so we might have to find an organization that actually values staff in the way that meets with our values. All right. And when you're doing that, the sweet spot is integrity. You work in integrity. And I want to show you how this works in real life in a hopefully very typical nonprofit fashion. And then we're going to go into some exercises to help you think about yourself and also then help you work with your teams when you get back to the office. So think about goal setting in real life. Typical situation is the board or CEO, you may have senior leaders, you may have middle managers, and you have a staff, right? Beginning of the year, fiscal year, calendar year, it doesn't matter. It's usually haphazard anyway. From the study that we, in the Conquer Leadership Group, we do leadership studies, and most nonprofits don't do planning very, very well. The board gives an arbitrary list of things to the CEO to do. Raise employee satisfaction 5%, raise more money, and they don't know what they're doing, so they just feel better giving this kind of garbage list to the CEO or the executive director. For everybody here, I call executive directors CEOs because your board does not understand what an executive director does. But they understand a CEO. And if you're an executive director of a nonprofit, you are the chief executive officer, and you deserve to be understood as that. So I understand there's general managers, there's all sorts of different terms, but just for the sake of this, that's why I err on the side of a CEO. So now the CEO, being a really good servant leader, really wanting to serve her staff, turns to her senior leaders and her middle management and said, so what do you need to do the jobs that you have this year? And she gets squeezed in the middle. Because the rest of the year, it's her listening to her board, knowing what's on her report card from her board, and then listening to her staff, knowing what they told her that they wanted to have done. And when she's working with her staff, she knows the whole time, her mind is just buzzing because she knows she's not working on the stuff that if she gets her annual review, that will be on that annual review. And when she's working on the board stuff, the staff's like, what the heck? Where'd she go? I'm not understanding this. Why isn't she helping me with my goals? So let's show us how story can fix that. A strategic plan is a story for your organization. It has everybody on the same page knowing what we're all about as an organization. It's not everybody having an individual idea. It's getting those ideas on the table and agreeing on them as a group. So this board and the CEO have the conversation together in the strategic plan. And from the strategic plan, not from the board, comes the list of things that have to be done. Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 5 years? Where do we want to be in 6 weeks? Whatever your strategic plan is, it's then what do we need to get us there? And then, so the board and the CEO have a conversation about that. And then the CEO turns to the senior leaders and said, here's what the board's objectives for our organization are. Where do you see yourself in them? I love that question because now we learn some of the stories of our staff. I have been privileged to work with nonprofits whose CFOs saw themselves on the fund generation side. They could tell a really good story with their financials, like Stephanie was talking about yesterday. And so they would say, I would never have said fundraising, I would never have shared that with the CFO, but the CFO might say, I have all the financial stuff, but I can help move the needle in the fundraising part, because I can talk to the donors that really care about the spreadsheets. So sharing from that, this is the full story, where you see yourself in it. Then you move into integrity. You work in integrity, and every day becomes working on the same page. You don't have people now asking, why isn't she paying attention to me? Or you don't have the stress of wondering, why am I not working on what I know my job requires, okay? Does that make sense? All right, this is how it can work in your life. Let's look at the identity circle for the rest of the time. And this is where, if you have your mission logs or some other pieces of paper, that can be really helpful. I've got some words on slides, not because I don't know how to do PowerPoint well, but because I know you're going to get the slides and I want you to remember what we talked about. So these words on slides are that stories, they're our operating system. A lot of the studies that are being done now show that this is how we process information. If you want to teach children to learn math well, you teach them narrative structure, and they can do algebraic formulas better because they understand a story format for what the story the algebra is saying. Mind-boggling, people didn't expect to find that research, but it's part of how our operating system is. They stick better than facts because of that. So you all know from having been here, even if you've only been here for a few sessions, that telling the story of one person being helped is far better than telling a lot of statistics. Your board, think about your board. Your board doesn't remember the mission statement or the vision plan or the financial pie chart, but they may remember that story of Susie, who walked into the Historical Preservation Society and was blown away that her community had so much history she didn't know about. And that's going to be something that those stick better than the financials. Not that we shouldn't know the financials. And then they become those scripts that subconsciously guide our actions for good or for ill. This is where we start sabotaging ourselves because our brain is like a file clerk, Remember when you went to the library and you had the card catalog instead of the computer terminal? Maxwell Maltz says in Psychocybernetics, talks about how our subconscious brain serves to prove us right. It's part of our operating system that wants to make us just prove that we are absolutely right in whatever we believe. So, one story from my life is I used to tell people I'm not really good with names, but I'm great with faces. So I would hear, my subconscious would be going through, okay, where are the stories? Yeah, oh yeah, you sucked on that name. Yeah, you failed there. Good on you. You're absolutely right. You're bad with, you don't remember names well. But those faces, and they'll pull stories to back up what you said. It writes the script for you. It's almost, Maxwell Maltz also says that we're goal-seeking, human beings are goal-seeking beings, that once we have the goal laid out, we will be directed to that, and it's those stories that direct us, getting us there. When I started listening to myself talk and realizing, wait a minute, memory is memory, isn't it? If I can remember faces, I must have a memory muscle that is working well. So I started telling myself, I'm really good with names. I remember faces and names well. And I would just start telling, I wouldn't share it out loud like I'm doing now, because I didn't want to be Stuart Smalley? I'm good enough, I'm smart enough, and gosh darn it, people like me. But I would do that when I was filling up my gas. I had little cards that would have little things that remind myself about who I am, because I wanted to reprogram some of my stories, and one of them was that about faces. So now if I do a training in names, I remember names of people in the audience by the end of the training, whether it's 45 minutes or 90 minutes or a day, and it blows people away, because what's the most important thing in someone's life? Their name. And I thought as a fundraiser, I better darn well be good at remembering names, because I don't want to say, you over there, thanks for supporting us. I don't remember who you are, but I really appreciate it. No, I want to say, Julie, thank you. That was really important that you supported us. So how do we get aware of what's in our catalogs, and how do we get our subconscious working on this? Pause. For those of you in the room, part of the workshop thing at the end of this is going to be saying, what's the one thing you took away? You're going to see a picture of Jack Palance as Curly from City Slickers. Do you guys remember Curly from City Slickers? I'm going to have to get a new illustration. I understand that now. There's a movie called City Slickers, which I don't recommend you see, but if you've seen it, you know most of it's really funny. Some of it's really weird. Billy Crystal is looking for his meaning in life. And Jack Palance says, as this cowboy says, one thing. And Billy Crystal says, what is that one thing? And Jack says, you got to figure it out for yourself. Now, as a trainer, I know with Franklin Covey training, Stephen Covey used to say that if you take one thing away from what you're in one session, you're going to retain about 70% more. And having pastored a church, I know that to be true, because if you've ever given a talk in a faith community, it's usually forgotten by the time they're eating the donuts at the end of the service. So I'm going to ask you each to commit to one thing that you're going to do from here. But here's, the stock stories is one of these activities that you might want to do. What are the stories that you talk about when you're introduced to people for the first time? I love this question because you're doing it now in the break sessions. You're telling people about yourself and your organization. So that is amazing. My story about that is when I was dating my wife, the woman, she wasn't my wife at the time. We do date still, but before she was my wife, when I was really trying to impress her instead of just trying to impress her, I was telling a story. And my roommate in college looked at her, rolled his eyes, looked at her and said, Emily, if you hang out with him much longer, you're going to hear that story a lot. That's one of his stock stories. Never heard that term before. And I started getting really scared because I didn't know how predictable I was. I didn't want to be that predictable. Having worked in healthcare, I just call it consistent now, because you want your patients to be consistent and stable. So at least I'm consistent. It's the same stories. Think about those stories. I think some of them are percolating. You might want to write them down now, because I think it was the second storytelling conference I came to, I started doing storytelling prompts. I thought, what are the stock stories I tell? And I wrote one line per, just enough to remind myself what the story was. 600 lines later, I was able to start the conference, because I had to stop because the conference was starting. They just kept germinating on the airplane, and kept, your brain starts finding other stories. Oh, I tell that all the time. Ooh, that one's, I shouldn't tell that anymore. But you start telling those. So stock stories. Some of you, this is a little abstract. So what I'm going to do is show you 5 stories that organizations should be telling. I've taught this at a previous conference. If you're with the videos, you can see that, a previous storytelling conference. But sometimes the organizational framework will help you figure out what your personal ones are. The first is your founding story as an organization. So as an individual, it could be when you've begun something, what are the stories you talk about beginning? When you began a new position, when you began a new project, when you began a new organization, when you began a new chapter in your family life or in your individual life, what was that? That may be a type of founding story. The next one is your mess up story. What do you tell yourself about the things that you screw up? And it's often what other people tell you. What stories do you tell other people? Oh, I do that all the time. It was like Chris with the words, he shouldn't give me the mic. That's ridiculous. Chris is awesome with a mic. But we just get to hear a privilege of some of the stories he's telling himself because he had the mic. So what are the reason the mess up stories are important is we all have to make mistakes. You heard it a number of times yesterday, at least in this room, where people are saying you have to practice your stories and you have to be willing to get them wrong. So telling the mess up stories and knowing what values you're messing up for, like you don't want to mess up because you embezzled funds from your nonprofit. That's not a good idea. That's not something you want to excel at. What's a good idea is maybe messing up for over delivering on customer satisfaction or donor satisfaction. Maybe it's going above and beyond for your staff in a way that made you realize it was totally idiotic to do that, but you can celebrate the value for that. The third one is endurance stories. These are kind of like the stories, for those of you that are familiar with Hebrew and Christian scriptures, Jeremiah is one of these. There's not really a happy thing in the book, but it's a long book of endurance. And we go through a lot in our life where we just need to know that we can endure. When we were in a hospital and we were having to riff again, because hospitals all are about acronyms, riffing was reduction in force. And the CEO finally got to the point he said, I'm not going to argue about 1-ply, 2-ply paper anymore. Toilet paper. We have the toilet paper. We're not going to reduce the toilet paper again. We've covered all bases. We need to reduce the force. And so you each have to look in your departments and see which staff you have to reduce, or which people are going to be not here in the coming months. And it was awful. There was a pall on this. But one of the managers was able to say, we'll get through this. After a long pause, she said, we will get through this, right? It's going to be awful, and we're going to have to make a lot of tough decisions, but we can do this. We've done this, and we've maintained our integrity, and we've ended up being able to take care of the people that were no longer with us. And that's what you needed to know. What we like in North America anyway better is the overcoming stories of times that you've won, that you've excelled. The stories of the times where somebody picked a fight with you and you fought the fight well while you still did the work that you were doing. Planned Parenthood is excellent with this. NPR, I think it was Ari Shapiro, it's that time again for the pledge drive. Whenever somebody in the Capitol says, well, we should defund NPR, they go up in arms and they have all their personalities saying, hey, this is why we're really dependent on you guys as individual donors. And so they're really good at saying, hey, help us fight the fight. Because as Tom Ahern says, donors want to be in a fight. Well, what are the fights that you want, that you're in? What are the ones that you're having inflicted at you? And we'll share, there's going to be another trick on fleshing that out. And the fifth one is your glorious end stories. In your organization, it's what would it look like when your organization isn't needed anymore? That feels kind of annihilating for a personal level. What will it look like when you're not needed anymore? Well, it looks like you'll be in your grave. So let's not think about it that way. Maybe it's what would you want said at your eulogy? And I don't find that to be a sad thing. I've worked with hospice. I think, what is it at the end of your life, what do you want to be known for? And this becomes a true compass for the people that I coach with because they realize things like nobody ever said they wanted to spend more time in the office. And you can start reading things that people didn't say on their deathbed and figuring that out. So what I'd like you to do is we've got a couple minutes. Let's take about 3 minutes and just work on either your stock stories, just writing some down and sharing with each other if you feel safe doing that, or trying to figure out one of the 5 areas that you'd like to catalog after this of stories. So 2 minutes now. I think I said 3 originally. We're going to do 2. Just start writing down. Talk amongst yourselves if you'd like, and then I'll get your attention again. All right, I'm seeing some blank stares, and I'm hearing some good talks. So I would love, remember, these are the stories that you find yourself telling other people. And what might be helpful, if you can't come up with something, is finding a friend that you trust, and because not all friends you trust or people in your life, and ask them, what are the stories you hear me saying a lot about myself? Like my friend in college said, that's one of Mark's stock stories. It can be helpful it can be hurtful, it can be painful to hear, oh, I say that all the time, but it can also help us get some objectivity on this. But did anybody want to share some of the stock stories that they heard themselves? Yeah.
I often hear myself talking about this time when we took a group of quirky kids, because that's who I work with, just like quirky middle school.
Okay, you took a group of quirky middle school kids.
Who are often really invisible in their own schools.
Who are often invisible in their own schools. Yeah, John's coming with a microphone, but I wanted to repeat it for the video. Sorry.
That they wouldn't be able to be in the hometown parade because they don't play sports. None of their
They wouldn't be in the hometown parade because they're quirky and they aren't on the sports teams. They're not on the other things that the town celebrates.
So they often feel very invisible.
Yeah.
So we decided that we were going to show up at the hometown parade, and the theme of it was that you had to pick a Christmas song and decorate your float based on the Christmas song. Our kids are non-traditional, so obviously they chose the Muppets as
Nice.
chickens singing bark, 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 bark as the song. Somehow that counted. And we built a float, and they were all chickens. One of the super quirky kids was Gonzo. And we won the parade.
Wow.
We won. And our art teacher, I'll never forget the moment of victory where she just jumped on the mayor of Quincy, Massachusetts, like arms and legs. But our kids in that moment were victorious, even as chickens.
That's awesome. What a great stock story. Thank you. I lived in Milton for a while, so I can't even imagine that. That's crazy. Who else? What are stock stories that they tell about themselves? You might tell about yourself. Yeah, John, thank you so much for doing that.
I generally try not to tell stories about myself, but this is making me think a lot about myself rather than my organization.
Yeah, good.
So the organization I'm at is one of the things we're proud of that we tell a story a lot about is we had this particular program. We have 5 different programs, but this one particular program was a disaster. It was losing at least $150,000 a year. It was dragging the organization down. The organization I started with was heading for bankruptcy for a couple of years. They almost voted to get rid of the company. But this particular program, after we had helped to get the rest of the company back on track, there was this one piece that was falling apart, and it was affordable housing for people who were formerly homeless.
Okay.
So we're charging rents, and we have a couple people with vouchers, but it was a really complicated building put together for 44 units of people coming from an emergency shelter for more stable housing. Mm-hmm. And we were using a person to manage that, a company to manage that. And you know, the way all the expenses came down, and it was really bare bones. They were losing about 100 to 140 a year. By 2017, in October, the whole building should have been closed and all the people thrown on the street. So some of the things we did were to
I love your story.
Oh, sorry.
Could you land the plane? Because I'm not sure where you're going.
Sure.
Yeah, that would be helpful. Thank you.
So long story short is the building now houses people whom, you know, working through a million things. We basically have the whole place making about 20,000.
Wow.
People get up in the morning, go for a walk. 60% of our people, we took over the property management and did it ourselves with social workers instead of people managing property.
Yeah.
So people, 60% of the people are working in the community. We have bank tellers. We have people working at Trader Joe's. But the reason I get to this story is my own success, past success at this has become my future failure. Because now the board doesn't tell me anything. They're like, hey, do whatever you want.
Right?
Right?
Yeah.
So I'm like, you know, now I'm here because I'm undermotivated. I'm like, well, what do I do next? Right?
Yeah,
So.
that is, thank you so much. Round of applause for that. Thank you. Because Quadrant 3 leaders are usually there. Quadrant 3 leaders are the ones that have experienced success in the past doing stuff, and they're just trusted to pull the rabbit out of the hat again because they've done it in the past, but they don't know how it's going to happen. So congratulations on both of those stories of innovation. That's so cool about thinking about how different things happen. Here's one that happened to me personally last week and this past week, and I'd love if there's one other person that would be like, raise their hand for John. Are you raising your hand or are you coughing? Oh, you're raising your hand. So John, if you could work your way over to this woman over here. As a verbal extrovert, if you move, I figure you want to talk because I want to talk. Sorry for putting you on the spot over there. Last week, I was talking to my bookkeeper, and I have told myself for most of my life, I'm not really good with money. I just suck at money. I don't understand financials that well. I'm building tools to help me be better at managing my money. My bookkeeper last week said, what are you saying? I said, well, I'm not good at money. It was one of the stock stories I was programming my system for. She said, Mark, you're one of the best business owners that I ever work with. Most are in a real mess. I thought I was in a real mess. I didn't know. She said, you've got stuff together. You're disciplined, you're doing the right things. And I was preparing for this talk, so I was able to think, oh, I get to reprogram a stock story. This is really good. Apparently I'm disciplined with money. I didn't know that. So, okay, over here, thank you so much for...
So I guess a founding story, but more personal than organizational. In every job interview I've ever had, I tell the story of being in college and having a professor go over kind of self-care, that in advertising, marketing, you're looking at a future where a lot of your colleagues will have substance abuse issues, end up divorced, end up with this. And I remember saying, this is too high a price to pay, that I can use these skills for something that's going to be better for me and be better for our communities and for everything else. And so that's kind of how I got my start in nonprofit, and that's a story I tell often.
That's really cool. Thank you so much. All right, so stock stories. Yeah, thanks for giving a round of applause. These are the stories that we can, as we start learning about them, we can start figuring out, do we want to keep them or do we want to discard them? That's a good choice. And the next thing we can do is, oh, if this is true about ourselves, if we've had this happen before, maybe it means that even though I don't know what I'm going to do next for innovation, things seem to come up and I seem to do well at that. When it comes to executive directors, boards that have a strong vision are often annoying to an executive director because it doesn't necessarily match what the executive director sees needs to happen. But boards that just kind of give up on the vision and explicitly trust the executive director seems to frustrate the executive directors too, because they want a little direction from the board. They want it to be a dialogue. And sometimes we just need to, there's an element of faith of saying, okay, we've done this in the past, I've had some success, and your stock stories can be the ones that you call on for that. Another framework, so I already did the what stories, you telling yourself, your Goto Stories, all right. See, I had a slide for the activity. That's so cool. All right, so when you're doing this with your team and you get the PowerPoint of the slides, you can use that with them. All right. This other one is something that I love. There's a guy named John Eldridge who asked about thinking about, he said, all of us are storytelling beings. And so thinking of your favorite stories and who are the people that you identify with in those stories. This is the scariest thing when I take people through this because it feels so stupid to do. And it has a huge payoff when we do it. Let me tell you about one of my favorite clients, Mark, and he lets me tell this story. Mark runs a public broadcasting station and a NPR station, and was having issues with his staff. His staff was a unionized labor force that was still trying to get public TV to be big, like it was in the 50s. And their only measure of success for their labor union was firing the CEO. That's how they justified dues, was firing senior leadership. And so they were writing poison pen letters to the board, trying to get him ousted, because they'd gotten the last two ousted as well. Odd story, because if there's no senior leadership, there is likely going to be no organization to fund the union dues. So there had to be some sort of coming together and dialogue on this. I asked him for homework after a coaching call. I said, just think about your favorite stories and think about who are the people that you identify with. He came back in the next call and he said, I did it. It's totally crazy. The only two I could think of was the Sean Connery character in Hunt for Red October and the Kevin Costner character in Dances with Wolves. That's it. I mean, I don't even know what that has to do with it. And we started unpacking it, and it was great for me to have to do research by watching both movies again as well. Oh, darn. But can you guys, what are some characteristics that you are in common with the Sean Connery Russian commanding officer general who wanted to defect to the United States, and Kevin Costner, the American soldier who wanted to understand the Indians or the Native Americans? What were some things that you might see just instant commonalities? It looks like they're turning against their people. Absolutely, yeah. What else? Both of them are in an identity crisis, exactly, yeah. Other things?
Contradicting the dominant paradigm.
Totally contradicting the dominant paradigm. And to that point, they were both in military combat situations. They were in high-stress situations, both seeking to learn the enemy. Understand their dialogue. Understand what is this about this other group? What are this people group? Maybe there's something to learn here. And what's that? And they were, that's true too. They were totally isolated and alone because the enemy didn't trust them and their own people became the enemy because they thought they didn't understand them. So the isolation was huge. As we started unpacking this, can you see how this totally helped Mark feel heard and understood? He was totally alone in what he was trying to do because he was trying to bring the public broadcasting and radio station stuff into the digital age. He knew that we can't just do a kind of variety art show on NPR and have a little jazz and then a little classical and then a little news and then a little of this and a little of that and a little of Christian McBride or something. People have choices. And there are apps that they can go to get everything that they want. There are radio stations. So he was trying to split news and classical music and do the similar and prioritize radio over TV just for that time. He had a strategic plan for this, and nobody understood it because that's not how you do public broadcasting. You tell the public what they need to hear. You don't listen, let them choose, was the dominant paradigm of the 20th century. As we went through the next few months of coaching, he was able to keep coming back to the Sean Connery character and the Kevin Costner character, and it provided a framework for him. Oh yeah, I'm feeling at odds with this. Another person was, another executive director I talked to, she said, Princess Leia and Katniss. And I said, what do you think the commonalities are? And she said, well, Princess Leia was a badass warrior and fighter in royalty. She carried herself really well in the midst of all that. And Katniss, same thing. She could carry herself well, and she could kill like nobody's business. I was like, where do you want to go with that? She didn't want to do it. Homicide was not her thing, even though she was in a high crime rate city. But she was saying she was getting attacked by her board. And she wanted to have the poise of royalty and dignity. And she wanted to use all of the tools at her disposal to fight the fight that she knew she needed to fight for her staff and for the kids that they served. So what are some of the characters that you guys have? Characters that you kind of resonate to in stories? So Kimmy Schmidt from Netflix, yeah, I'll repeat these. Thanks, John.
And then probably Leslie Knope.
I'm going to talk about Leslie Knope tomorrow. Yes, all right, from Parks and Rec. So that's where it goes. What you just experienced. What's your name? Katie. What you're just experienced is where most of us go. These are embarrassing because. So thanks for having the guts and the safe space to do that. Let's give Katie a round of applause because that took guts. One of the reasons I love this conference is I haven't had this example work in a group setting yet, so thank you, Katie. That's awesome. Woohoo! All right, what else? Who else has like favorite characters? Yeah. Winnie the Pooh, awesome. Because he has an eclectic community around him. Yeah. Both work and personal life. Awesome. Thank you so much. Over here? Did I hear somebody, or are you just breathing? Breathing is good. We're in favor of that. Yeah. Elsa or?
Alphaba from Wicked.
Oh, Alphaba from Wicked, okay. Strong, talented, a little misunderstood at times. Why I love this is that this is going to be, I found it brings an understanding. I don't know, the stock stories helped, but when I did this exercise the first time with a group in the church I was pastoring, I felt so embarrassed because obviously it was Gandalf and Lord of the Rings. Duh. And everybody's going to say that. So how cheesy am I to go to this group and like, I want to be Gandalf, or I resonate with Gandalf. I like him a lot. I'm drawn to him. It's not necessarily that you want to be them, but you're drawn to that character. You know what I found? Nobody else wanted to be Gandalf. And so, no, they wanted to be Aragorn. They wanted to be other characters in different reasons. And so when I love that you guys were explaining a bit, well, we can work on that later. But some of you were explaining why. For me, Gandalf was, again, just an amazing warrior. He could fight like nobody's business, and he was a nerd. He was a scholar par excellence. If you read the books, he went into the monastic archives, and he's the one who discovered what the ring was, because he spent the time to do the boring research and going through the scrolls. And that's how I want to be. I never want to be a presenter that hasn't done the hard work or the research so you don't have to do it. I just want to give you the tools to fight the good fight. And so now, because of that, I found that to be such an iconic image for me and for the way I operate in the world, and so much about how I'm going to move in situations that if I can't have that space to actually do the research and find out what's the right way to do things, I know that may not be a good fit for me. That it turns out there's this company in Germany that does little action figures type stuff, and there's like a Gandalf-like character. So I've got one on my desk and I've got one on my bookshelf. So wherever I look in my office, I can remember, oh yeah, that's right. This is who I'm want to be like. So you can play with this, and you don't have to tell anybody what these are. So this is another exercise to consider doing, is thinking about who are the characters that you're like, what do they have in common? And then the last one, I'm going to leave this up on the screen. I call it the Jefferson Assessment, and I'll give you the story because we're at a story conference. The reason it's called the Jefferson Assessment is that Dave Jefferson gave me my first training gig, first full-day training gig for his vet practice back in 2003 in Central Maine. And he said, I don't care what you do, I trust you, which is a little crazy because I had never done this before. But he said, I trust you. All I want to make sure is that my staff has asked these questions at one point. What do you love to do? What do you hate doing? What do you want to do more of? What do you want to do less of? And where do you want to be in 5 years? And I thought, there's no way I'm going to do this. Because first of all, it's repetitive, right? What do I love doing and what do I want to do more of? Duh, it's not going to be the same answer. And what do I hate doing and what do I want to do less of? That's going to be the same answer. And there's no way any staff is going to feel comfortable telling their boss where they want to be in 5 years because it's probably not with him. Unbelievably, I did this there. I did it also in another place in Maine with a physical PT, physical therapy practice. People answer these questions really well. And what we found as a team, I even, my wife kicked me out of the house a couple years ago and said, you need to take yourself on a strategic planning retreat like you take clients on. And so this is one of the strategic planning questions I asked myself. What do I love doing? What do I hate doing? What do I want to do more of? What do I want to do less of? Where do I see myself in 5 years? I found it to be incredibly insightful at just surfacing what I knew to be true, but I wasn't willing to say. When we do it with teams, we find that people feel very comfortable saying, I don't want to be here in 5 years. And that's the reality, newsflash, for the workforce today. HR professionals are telling you if you can keep somebody for 2.5 to 3 years, you have a successful staff retention. That's a huge change in a lot of nonprofit sectors. So asking this question is a way of potentially retaining them more. But then you can also say everything that you have to share with them can be, well, if you want to be doing this in 5 years, then it would be good to learn these skills. And you can start helping them grow as individuals. People will tell you the best part about it if you do it with a team is, and this is the horse example, one of the people said, I hate doing castrations. And somebody else said, I love doing castrations and wish I were doing more, but I can't stand doing knees. And the other woman that didn't want to do the castrations liked the knees. So they were able to reorganize their workflow with the horses based on what people liked and didn't like. Nobody had asked them. So I would encourage you as you go maybe into a break or into your evening tonight or something to ask yourself these 5 questions. Give yourself permission to answer them honestly, because it could. Some of you are still in middle school giggling about castrations, I understand. But yeah, that's true, that's funny. And just be honest, and if that's on there, don't tell me, but good for you, you be you. But do this assessment because this is also gonna help with the stories, because we don't wanna sabotage ourselves. And one of the reasons that we're sabotaging ourselves is because we don't know the stories we're telling ourselves. We don't understand what we're talking to our operating system and telling it to do. Or we're just taking external stories and thinking we have to fit that mold. So many of us as leaders feel like we have to fit the mold of the other. We're trying on other people's leadership suits instead of learning in Quadrant 3 to find out what's the suit that I'm already wearing and how can I offer that to the world. So that has been our session. I want to hear just popcorning. I'll repeat it. John, you don't have to run around. Thank you. What's one thing you guys are going to take from this session? Like one thing you're going to put into practice. Pamela. You're a superhero. Awesome. You weren't calling me your superhero, right? You were identifying it? Okay. I'm totally with you. I was just playing with you. Thanks. Yes. 5 stock stories? Or find them? Good for you. 5. See, the specificity is awesome. She's going to find 5 stock stories. What else? Trusting your internal compass. Good. More? Yes, sir. Be good to yourself as well. I find that is one of the hardest things, so thank you. I think I'll take that away from this session. Yeah, Katie. Your subconscious brain really is working hard to prove you're right. Yeah, nice. Yes, ma'am.
I'm not broken just because a particular system doesn't work for me.
Oh, that is gold. She said, I'm not broken just because a particular system doesn't work for me. Yes, awesome. Is that somebody else over here? Yes. Challenge your self-talk. Yeah. Don't be uncritical about that. What I find, especially in the nonprofit sector, is the stuff we tell ourselves is stuff we'd never let people say about a friend of ours. Why wouldn't we be as good to ourselves as we'd expect other people to be to our friends? And on that, thank you so much for the session. Really glad that you had an experience with us. At the end of the year, when Chris uploads them into the portal that you have, you're going to get a handout that reminds you how to do these assessments. There's also more stuff here if you want to learn about leading the podcast. I did a year of podcasting leaders, 10-minute podcast interviews, 10-minute conversations on 3 questions. What do you love about leading? What's the time that you failed and how did you survive? And what should leaders do today? And it's inspiring how people were really, really vulnerable. And if you want to be on that, I'd like to do another round of those. So feel free to see me up here afterwards. And then there are some books that I've also found helpful as we go through this. Thanks so much, everyone. Have a great break and have the good rest of your day.